All right, well, let's talk a little bit about money. I'll start by just making a few personal observations about this. I was 10 years ordained before I was in parish work, and ended up, it was sort of a fluke that it even happened, and I ended up having 3 parishes over the years, all very small places because of the other hats I was wearing. None of them had a school. One of them had one, but it had closed 25 years before I got there. If I had stayed, I intended to reopen it. But in each of those places, and each of them was moribund and probably should have closed 15 or 20 years before I got there. But I ended up sort of reviving all 3 of them. And the first thing that I did, in addition to upgrading the liturgy and so forth, was telling people that, number one, if they had children, I expected all the children to be in Catholic school. And here's the list of schools in the area. Choose one. If you tell me you can't afford it, you come to me with your IRS form from last year, and we'll have a look at it together. And if I'm convinced that you can't afford it, the parish will pick up the tab on the tuition wherever your child is. In all of those instances, within a year's time, all kids were in Catholic school. At the very same time, it meant the catechesis of the parish to remind them what I said at the very first session on a Tuesday night, that the education of Catholic children is the responsibility of the entire Catholic community. And we had, a scholarship fund that people could contribute to, and also we had the possibility of, we had at least 2 collections a year to fill up that fund. And interestingly, the vast majority of parents did not say they needed assistance after having our face-to-face conversation, but they appreciated the idea of the support that was offered if necessary. And the 3 parishes, the people at large said, "Oh, this is good. We haven't had kids in this parish in 10 years." And so even though we didn't have a school, and in one of those areas we had 8 parishes in 10 blocks, and 6 of them had schools. And so in fact, even for funeral masses, I had our boys come across the park from St. Casimir's School, and they came and served the funerals. So it was almost like having a parish school. And so that's number one. And number 2, I think we have to be, let's say, think out of the box a little bit about the structure of schools. Monsignor Sal was talking about, a school with, 80 kids. There's no reason why you can't run a school with 80 kids if you're not stuck in some kind of weird mold that, we have K, 1, 2, 3, 4, and no, we can do, and you put some kind of wonderful educational label on it, like multi-grade or multi-age education. And in fact, it really is true, because we know that just because a kid is in 2nd grade and may be reading at the 2nd grade level, his math may not be at the 2nd grade level, may be behind it or ahead of it. And so there's no reason why you can't have some kind of creative structure to the whole thing. And the third point, I always encourage pastors to adopt the Wichita model, which is all kids go to school for free. And what I used to do was I would tell parents, give a donation to the parish, that's tax deductible, and I'll be the conduit of your tuition to the school. Now, if I had my own parish school, I would have the Wichita model very simply, and that is you're a registered parishioner who go to Mass every Sunday. You use the envelope system, et cetera, et cetera. And one of the perks of that is the free education of your children. Your donation to the parish is tax deductible. Unfortunately, in the present system, your payment of Catholic school tuition is not tax deductible, although Trump talked about that in our conversation with him a couple of months ago. So those would be some, quick thoughts off the top of the head about finances. Msgr Shadle, do you want to talk about your ideas?
Which ideas are you talking about? I have lots of ideas.
In terms of finances and parish involvement with the finances of the school and how the school, how you support the thing.
Right. Well, first of all, I'm at a pretty affluent parish here in Indianapolis, and we've had the tuition model ever since I've been here, which most of the parents can well afford. I would say about 20% of our parish budget goes to subsidize the school. And that's the way the Archbishop insists. In other words, say I had a situation where I could completely support my school with tuition, the Archbishop would say, no, you can't do that. The parish has to have a buy-in to that, because we did have a parish like that. So thank God the bishops that we've had have been pretty insistent that all parishes support a school. Every parish in the city, in the Indianapolis deaneries, and there's about 40 of those, every parish supports a grade school and a high school. For want of a better term, we're taxed for that. It's about 10% of our income to pay for the deanery high school. So thank God we've had bishops like we've had. If your particular parish doesn't have a grade school, then you're going to support a neighboring grade school. So all parishes, at least within the metropolitan, the Indianapolis area, support K through 12 Catholic school education. We're very blessed here in Indiana. We have a very liberal voucher system. We do have some students in our school that are on vouchers because they're from unusually large families, and even wealthier people do have financial hardships from time to time as the economy shifts. And we also have an SGO, a Choice Charitable Trust. And we have a very good system with our Indiana taxes. For example, if I donate $1,000 to the SGO for our school, St. Luke, I get a $500 deduction on my Indiana state tax. So we have a really good situation here in Indiana. Not at my school, but we do have a couple parishes, Father Peter, like you're describing, that we call total stewardship parishes. There is no tuition for the school. It is completely supported by the Sunday and Holy Day collections.
Good. Father Sal?
When in the 1960s and the 1950s, when Cardinal McIntyre was building up the high school system here, today it's supposedly the largest in the United States, Catholic high school wise. He put a tax on the parishes just for the high schools. There were 3%. I think it was 3% for the central operation of the archdiocese, 3% for the 3 seminaries, and 3% for the high school. So he was very committed to building up that high school system. When Cardinal Mahoney came along many years later, he created what's called the Catholic Education Foundation. This is no relation to Father Peter's foundation, but and he brought together some of the big philanthropists of LA to begin this foundation, which now provides, I think it's up to $10 to $11 million worth of scholarships a year for the inner city elementary schools and high schools. And he was able to eliminate the 3% tax by doing that. We also have there's a number of Catholic foundations that have been very good to the schools and to the church, but there are two that have gone above and beyond that, the Shays and the Dan Murphy Foundation. The Dan Murphy is specialized in capital improvements for the high schools, and the Shays have done the same thing for the elementary schools. So without these three foundations, the Catholic Ed Foundation and these two foundations, many of these schools would have closed years ago. But there still are debts in the inner city elementary schools, schools that can't afford to pay the health insurance or the other insurances. And since it's all centralized by the Archdiocese, they don't pay, and the Archdiocese has to pick up the tab. But the Archdiocese is very good about not losing track of how much you owe them and how much your debt is increasing. And the current Vicar General is very much on top of it and wants the school office to come up with a way to deal with this. At the local level, at the parish level, I mean, that's where the issues begin, are at the parish level. And it's just a matter of, depending on your principal, if you have a principal who's gone through training today, at least out here, I think they have a better preparation for the finances than in olden times, because the finances are much more complicated today than they used to be. But still, the basic concept, number one, you have to be able to account for every dollar that comes in and every dollar that's spent. Very, very basic. But yet it eludes some people who have been in schoolwork for a long time. But if you begin with that and emphasize that's a foundation. Number two, I would say, is the high schools were always required to do monthly financial reports, monthly financial statements that had to go to the central office. But because the parish schools are run by the pastor, the central office couldn't require that. And so there wasn't monthly reporting on the part of the elementary schools. It was more voluntary. But if you as a pastor require a monthly financial statement, a financial report from your principal or the bookkeeper / principal, or however the system is at your place, and then you review that with the principal, or at least look at it with your little pencil or red pencil, and then in your weekly meeting with the principal, go over any questions you have. The advantage to doing that is that, number one, the principal knows you're on top of it, because oftentimes the pastors, at least out here, the pastors don't even want to deal with school finances or don't know how to, don't have any understanding of them. You know, we have a lot of extern priests who have become incarnated, and they've never had to deal with anything like school finances. And so having that monthly statement, reviewing it with the principal, going over the budget, and not letting the principal pressure you, well, the budget's due this week. No, well, you got to get it to me a month in advance so I can study it, see? Because that happens. Everything is last minute because we're all busier than we used to be, and so we're doing things at the last minute. But when it comes to that budget, you got to get it in advance so you can study it and ask a lot of questions. And also, another point related to that is school people like to overstaff. It comes naturally for some reason. I don't know, it's something in maybe when they get their credentials or something, but something in the water at the university. But if they overstaff and the enrollment is not keeping up, if the staffing doesn't match the enrollment, you're going to have financial issues. It may take a while, but it's going to catch up with you. A friend of mine just went into a new parish where there were 4 or 5 full-time people in the main office of the elementary school. And it wasn't a huge elementary school. It was only about, I think, 200 kids, 220 kids. And they had a full-time development person who wasn't even raising enough money to pay her salary. So, but that should be so common sense. Full-time person to raise money who's not even raising enough money to pay her salary, that person has to go. Or you at least give them benchmarks, and you say you have until this year or this month to raise this amount. Usually they leave before you have to fire them if they can't do it. Or some of them rise to the occasion because they never were given any type of mentoring or any type of job description to where they knew what they were supposed to be doing in the first place. So keeping up with the monthly finances, looking at the staffing, having those honest conversations with the principal. Now, on the other hand, I should add this. I'm thinking of a particular elementary school in our archdiocese. The principal is one of the super lay principals, has been there maybe 20, 30 years, close to retirement. A young priest comes in as the new pastor, and he was pretty strong personality, pretty forceful, but and was changing things without much conversation. And granted, that's the pastor's prerogative, but looking at it from the office point of view, I thought, this was a principal. Even though I was a high school person, I had a tremendous amount of respect for this principal because of her experience. I served on an accreditation committee with her at one time. And for somebody who didn't even know her to come in and to start making changes without any type of conversation, it's a great way to kill morale. And we got to consider morale when we're dealing with the school faculty and with the school leadership. Anything else on that? Here's an example. I'll give you 2 or 3 horror stories about that involve pastors who weren't on top of things. One principal in an East LA parish, this is a number of years ago, had a priest who was an extra and had been incarnated, was new to the archdiocese from Latin America. And he ran wild with the school credit card. I don't think the pastor even knew there was a school credit card. He was gambling and some of the Indian reservations, going to Las Vegas. I think by the time it was all over, he had used, I forget if it was $200,000 of school money. How this East LA school even had that much money in the first place, but he used it on himself. And eventually, somehow the system caught up with him, and he was removed and went to court. But the pastor was not on top of the finances at all. He just trusted the guy. The guy was very charismatic. He was elected to the principal's advisory council, so his peers respected him. And that's what happened there. There was a few other cases like that. The most famous, this Supreme Court case Kevin and I were just talking about a little while ago, that helped strengthen the ministerial exception, involved 2 elementary schools in the Archdiocese of Los Angeles, surprisingly, who are just a few miles apart, Hermosa Beach and Redondo Beach. And one of those 2 schools, St. James School, Redondo Beach, I don't know if people connected the dots, but that's the school where the 2 sisters had absconded with a tremendous amount of money over 30 years being there, 20 years being in the position. That made headlines around the world, that these 2 sisters were going to Las Vegas and other places. Of course, when you're not wearing a habit, that could happen, I guess. But
Msgr, the same thing happened. There were 2 religious brothers in, I think, El Paso, Texas. Same thing. Really? They wore the habit, but I don't think they wore it to Vegas. But they wore it.
Well, Atlantic City might have been a little closer, but in that particular case, it's a very interesting case because they had it's a wealthy beach city parish. They had 2 very experienced pastors who had both did their full terms there. And I guess because these sisters were so experienced in the school world, the pastors trusted them, they knew what they were doing, and it was one less thing on the pastor's plate to deal with. But of course, look what happened. There's so much money going through that school, it can be a temptation. It obviously was for these 2 sisters. And the Chronolote order is a tremendous teaching order. No matter what their other issues are, it's a tremendous teaching order, and it's very sad that happened. But again, if the 2 pastors who had overlapped during those years had a little more hands-on with the school finances, it wouldn't have happened. So.
Just a story that came to my attention recently. A priest was assigned, about this time last year, was assigned to a new parish with a large school. So he got there in July 1st, and September, he got a bill from the school office for back insurance for the faculty. And retirement. And he looked at the figure and he said, the computer must have gone crazy or something, but it was $1.5 million that he owed the diocese for back medical insurance and retirement benefits. And so he called and said, is there a mistake? And they said, no, your predecessor hadn't paid anything for 10 or 12 years. And you say, how could this go on for this long? I mean, talk about not malfeasance, nonfeasance, on the part of the central office, and that this man gets there and discovers that he's supposed to pay 1.5 million, and he said, well, obviously it's not going to happen, and if this had been handled 10 years ago when it was maybe $50,000 that was in arrears, but now we're up to this. So the other point I would like to make is...
Father Peter, as you point out, the real problem is when the pastor is absconding with the money.
Yeah.
But I think hopefully in most places, at least here, we have a pretty good school finance committee. The lay people on the finance committee, I think, would catch something like this pretty quickly. But if you don't have a good finance committee, you've got a problem.
Yeah, and the purpose of that committee is really to help ensure that the pastor doesn't get in a fix. And I made a terrible mistake in one place. I asked if there was going to be an audit before I took over, and the Archbishop said, "Oh, no, we don't need any of that." And I was there a year and discovered there were all kinds of financial problems, some of which were being placed on my plate as though I had done it. And so again, the importance of making sure that all the T's are crossed and the I's are dotted. Father, you had an intervention. Father Roman.
Hello, everyone. I'm joining your meeting because I'm after a funeral. I came from the funeral home. Talking about money, and I like, Father Peter, what you 2 days ago when you said, that Vera said about, the difference between Catholic school and a public school. And when they ask her, that we have everything, in a public school, why to send people to the Catholic school? But Vera responded, yes. The difference is, do they have Christ? So we have the Christ at the Catholic school, and the Catholic school is about money. And many people are saying that Catholic school is about, like for the elite, because it's very expensive. And, all of you brother priests and friends said about it that you have many good ideas, you have many good plans, and Monsignor Joseph said, he has lots of, and Monsignor Sell also good ideas how to do this. I'm just talking, I want to say about on behalf of the Spanish people like Mexican. I am with the parish St. Lawrence, a suburb of Detroit, and we have the very good school, and the number of the children is 760 children, and we still have people who are on the list waiting, but we don't have any Mexican people. It's too expensive for them. Even we have lots of programs still. If the family is about 3, 4, or 5 children and their income is only just one father is working, it's very low. How we can, help them? Even we have, some programs, but the programs, helping, I hope will not bring the division between rich people and the, like Mexican people who don't have and they cannot send, their children to the school. We try to do the best. We have some, but still there is a large population of the Hispanic people who are not able to send, to the Catholic school. Even they are 100%, Catholics, that they supposed to send, their children to the Catholic school, not because of the lack of money.
Not because
of
the lack of money?
Well, they don't have money.
Oh, okay.
Can I add, in our experience here, we have schools in the inner city, East LA, South Central Los Angeles, that are almost 100% Latino. Some of them single moms. In the black schools, single moms. And they're just as poor as the people who aren't sending their kids to Catholic schools, but somehow along the way, they just determined that this was going to be the way they save their kids from the horrible violence and the poor education in those public schools. Somehow they got in their head, this they're going to do it. They figured out how to do it, and they're maybe working 2 or 3 jobs. But for every one of them that's in one of our schools, there's probably 10 to 20 to 30 that aren't. But it could be a matter of getting the word out through the parents. I mentioned yesterday the idea of having parents once quarterly just give a little witness talk after the announcements at the end of Mass about the experience of Catholic school for their family. If we did that at the Spanish Mass every Sunday for a year, and we had the tables outside with the school principal or school leadership to sign them up, and then using Father Peter's idea about those individual meetings, looking at their tax forms. But when they hear other people who are from that same congregation who are making those sacrifices, then they realize, oh, it's not just for the wealthy. It's not just for the elite as it was in my country. And if she can do it, why can't I do it? It takes a while because you have to hear something. What is that saying? You have to hear it 7 times before it clicks. But it's a matter of just really drilling it over and over again, that we have people who are doing it. Let them share. It's better for them to share it sometimes, and you give your side to it, and then over time it'll inch up, I think.
I think there are a couple of other issues here. One, Msgr makes the point about Hispanics coming here, come with the idea from Latin America that Catholic schools are elite academies, and they presume that we're talking about $15,000, $20,000 tuition for grammar school. And when they find out that actually in most places between $4,000 and $5,000, they're kind of stunned, number one. Number two, they're also coming here without understanding the tremendous evil of the government school system in this country. They're coming from countries where everybody is Catholic in the state school. There may even be religion taught in the state school. Certainly, all of the hot-button social issues are not part of the scene in Latin America. They have to be informed of that, first of all, by you as the pastor, but also Father Sal's idea, the witness of other Hispanic parents. And I always used to like the idea, I would make parents, I would call them school ambassadors, and also gave them a reward. If you bring in a family that stays for a year, you get 50% tuition reduction, right? So again, it's a peer apostolate, and that's very, very effective. I mean, if Mrs. Gonzalez says to Mrs. Gomez, listen, this has been the greatest thing for our kids, for our family. This is all looking very good for the future. Come on board, and it's far more effective than sending out letters. Which first of all, who reads any of that stuff? So the other point I would like to make is I'm a great believer in volunteers, and our parishes and our schools are overstaffed with very high paid people for the most part, ridiculous salaries, and the three parishes I had, and granted, again, I told you they were small places, but the first thing I did was I got rid of all paid personnel, and said, we need a part-time secretary here. We need someone to do the financial books once a month. We need someone to put together the parish bulletin. I ended up having a secretary who had just retired as the executive secretary for the president of Blue Cross Blue Shield of New Jersey. And she was desperate to be able to do something that was creative and working for the kingdom. And I think you can do the same thing in the school area. Huh? There are lots of people, particularly retired people, and so many people are retiring today at the age of 45 and 50, to get them into the pool. And so we're eliminating my high school alma mater. I said to the principal about 10 years ago, we have an alumni group that's impressive. I mean, judges and lawyers and doctors and scientists. I said, why can't you get some of these people, and who have remained local, to be adjunct teachers? So, Dr. So-and-so can come in and teach biology, advanced biology, with some kind of creative scheduling. Oh, no one wants to do that. Well, as a matter of fact, you would have someone that is very committed, very talented, and the thing can work. But again, if we keep these rigid categories, where is that going to bring us? We're approaching the witching hour for a quick break before we come back. Anything else? We're going to have another session this afternoon with lay people on the finance issue. Yeah.
Peter, I just mentioned when I was in the Chancery, we had an African-American priest who was pastor of a Center City African-American parish, very dedicated to their Catholic school. And he once told me, he said, Joe, there's a lot of people in my parish that, what did he say? There's people in my parish that won't afford Catholic education. He said, it's not that they can't. He said, but they won't.
Yeah.
And I will say, as an aside, during that period of time, the Archdiocese went to what we call central payroll. Everybody is paid centrally from the Chancery office. I had to get him out of hot water for years when the teachers and staff were paid from the parish. He deducted appropriately the taxes, Social Security, and so on and so forth. But he never sent it to the government. So we had to work hard to keep the poor guy out of prison, and we did. But he said, yeah, there's nobody in my parish that can't afford it, but there's a lot that won't.
Yeah. And I think that's also an issue that has to be brought to the attention of the Hispanic community. And see, one of the other problems with Hispanic enrollment in our schools, if the parish they belong to does not have a school, those pastors are very often loath to encourage their children to go to a Catholic school, because they're afraid that if they go to that school, the people will then move to that parish. And so that's another issue that I think has to be addressed. So anything else? We'll take a break for about 10 minutes, and then we'll come back with our wonderful grad student to talk about her research. So 12:10.
Kevin, for the invitation, Father Peter. It's been wonderful. So much that you've been covering, it really speaks to a lot of what we've seen. And by the way, full disclosure, we've worked, Vera, Cruz, myself, and a business partner. It's a boutique investment firm. We work across the country, and we have a specialization with Catholic institutional work. So this is just for, not the self-promotion part, but just for orientation purposes. And we work with three areas, not just in schools, but we work with governance, and we work with a lot of refinancing and modeling. And so we have a pretty both broad and deep view of the temporalities aspects of finances, both in schools as well as in chantries. And that's really worked well in the school's work, because what it's done is it's given us a tremendous insight into how the parish and school dynamics work. And they're obviously different in different places, but there are some commonalities. Having said that, let me, before we get into the presentation, which I'll actually share with you, let me give you, let me share my screen, ensure that we have it up and that you can see it. So Kevin, if you don't mind giving me a sense when you can see it.
It's coming.
We're good.
Okay, excellent. So in essence, here's what we'll be covering today. So we'll have, in essence, starting with some of the data, and then really being able to use the data in the right sort of way. Secondly, a solutions framework with all the different sub-bullets that you're seeing there, and then change management. We start with the data, not because we're a bunch of Excel jockeys buried in a dark room and coming in and telling folks what to do, but because, and even in Elise's presentation, it's interesting, we've seen this, and even in our work with Kevin, we see this as we do across the country. Sometimes a perception and reality is just not true. And so there's nothing like the data to do two things: one, dispel or shed light on the truth, or secondly, sometimes you'll get information that's not going to give you the causality, but then it prepares you to be able to ask the right question. And then really looking into trends. And then in terms of the solutions, what we have found is that sadly, and I'm not a very good marketer or sales guy, but what I will say is there's probably nothing new in this presentation. What is different is, I hope and I pray to serve you, is some processes and very concrete principles and very tangible frameworks that you can implement to help you with the better management of the schools as you undertake that in management, leadership, whatever the configuration is. And then really giving very specific elements to be able to utilize, or to have those that you are working with utilize. And finally, change management. One of the things that I really learned in our work was, over so many years, we would do all these analyses and we're all excited about it and it seems to be so compelling. And you're dealing with very bright people, whether it's pastors, principals, business managers, sometimes boards that were comprised of former CFOs of organizations. And you have this wonderful data set and you have all this information that points to some very concrete, immediate things to do, and yet nothing would get done. We had been paid, so it wasn't even a matter of compensation or anything like that. But it was very frustrating to my business partner and I, who also happens to be a Catholic, to say, how is it that something so compelling is not being acted upon? And really it was about change management. So what that means is applied behavioral science. So we're not psychologists, we're not even educators, we're just Catholic entrepreneurs that have experience and have seen things for a while and developed solutions for some of the things that we see. So to that end, that's the meat of the presentation. What you're not going to see are several things. One, we're not going to do an attention getter with all the closures, 100 or so school closures that we've all seen, because you already know that, and that's not really pointing much to the future. Secondly, because of time, we're not going to do anything on governance, but I'm so glad that Father Stravinskas and others have touched on the essence of governance, because finance without governance, changes or cooperation or integration means very little. And this is not about budgeting. It's a much more strategic, higher level view. And moreover, it's looking forward, not just back. You're not going to see spreadsheets. So don't worry for all your pastors. If you want them, we'd be happy to bore you pro bono. We love what we do. We thank God for being able to do this and provide for our families. We've been around for close to 9 years now and working in the sector for about 15. So we feel very blessed. And then you're also not going to see a bunch of very specific school models. So Father Stravinskas mentioned the multi-age model. We've also seen a lot of toying recently with a hybrid model of doing part-time at home and then part-time in a location. That's probably going to be more explored this fall, if I had to guess. just by circumstances. And then you're not going to see the micro school models explored with any, you're not going to see any of that, but this relevant information. And then finally, as I said, there's not going to be anything new. What we are going to give you is some very hands-on tools to be able to undertake your task. So with that, let me just launch into some of this. I'm violating one of the cardinal rules of presentations with PowerPoint, which is generally visual, which is to ask you to read a bunch of things. So instead of trying to get your attention, or especially for some of the pastors that may be taking to school, is really, if you could read this. This is very recent. This is an actual client example, and it's fascinating to me. So I'm going to pause for about a minute to let you read this, and we're going to discuss it for a few seconds. So what you have here is fascinating, because a school leader gets a call at 11:06 in the morning, 11:06 in the morning. Imagine you're in the middle of your school day in the COVID situation. By the way, this is an area of the country where the diocese has not had a great PR reputation, not particularly friendly to the Catholic faith area of the country. With that context, this school leader is being asked about a paycheck protection program loan, which many of us have availed ourselves of. The deadline is in about 54 minutes. Possible to get a statement, please. And what is the amount of your loan, and what do you think about tuition, and what are you doing? So if you don't respond, what's going to happen is that ABC3 reporter is going to say, oh, we talked to the school and we didn't get a response. Same thing for the diocese. So what this speaks to, and the reason why I put this slide together, is because it shows on the need for integration, coordination, and knowledge, in other words, financial information on the school's finances and the coordination between the school leader, the pastor, and probably the business manager, as well as the diocese. So, so I didn't, if you're a pastor recently taken over a school, or even if you've been there for a while, imagine getting this call or this email from your school principal, your school leader, and saying, we need to respond to this now. So it puts you in a tough situation. Here's another one that I'm going to do, and I'm not going to ask you to read this whole one, but again, the importance of integrating finances. And here, let me read the caption for you, which is, are our pastors and bishops formed, trained, and ready to make tough decisions related to schools based on data, developing plans, and supporting execution? This one I'm not going to ask you to read, but basically this is a complaining parent for a school that's being closed, that's been a while, serving largely African-American, Latino community in the diocese. And what's amazing, we had direct working experience with this school. Pastor's really good man. He's only been there about 2 years. Principal's terrible. She's on her way out. Didn't care anything about the school, and her modus operandi was always, it's all for the kids, it's all for the kids. Never did anything for professional development, never hired good teachers. Catholicity was nominal. Pastor comes on board, tries to change it, was working to change it, and then the school ends up closing. They're using COVID as a major reason. It's not really. The school had a trend analysis that just wasn't going to allow it to survive the way it was being operated. But again, the point for using this slide is to allow you to read it. By the way, I've changed some of of course, the names and the words and this and that, but this is almost verbatim the letter that the bishop got, that the bishop received at the chantry, the vicar general received, the school superintendent received, and then I can only imagine, eventually it'll make its way out to the press. Why is this relevant to pastors and finances? Well, because this is all where it comes together when you have to close schools And unfortunately, many of us are going to have to face that reality in our work. That is the last option that we always advocate for. But if it's going to happen or needs to happen, then it can be done in good ways, as good as that can be. So with that, I'll continue. But again, I wanted to bring some real live client examples that are very, very current. This is a week ago yesterday, just to give an appreciation for some of the pastors of the situations that they may confront and how it ties into finances. Well, start with the why, or understand what the problem we're trying to solve. Starting from the clockwise competition, I don't buy into the fact that, the public schools and the charter schools have eaten our lunch. I don't believe that. I believe that that could be the case in some areas, but for the most part, it has to do with we've lost our way. And I think the point is made on differentiating ourselves through our authentic Catholicity or other areas like the classical Catholic education capacity. What is our ability to manage our operations well at the school-based site? Governance, we've discussed this, and this would probably be a good, healthy debate, Father Stravinskas, over a dinner and a lot of wine. We have mixed feelings and mixed sentiments about the pastor being the head of the school, not because they shouldn't be the spiritual head of the school, of course they should be, but because a lot of times we are asking too much of our pastor, and they've already got too much on their plates to be the effective temporal, leaders, if you will, or managers of it. And that's where you heard Kevin mention different modalities or models where the pastor retains that spiritual father role, which is paramount, yet doesn't have to do the budgeting all the time, every day. Identity, we've already discussed, and then the operating models, which in the old days, because they were more community-based organizations with large Catholic communities supporting them, tuition was affordable, had the cost structures out were different, and then the affordability, we talked about the concern about some priests that feel, or in reality, of getting too elite. And then the demand, are we going out there and actually hustling? I can tell you, we do some charter school work. When a new charter school goes into an area, including we just opened one up, I'm on the board of an organization. This was not professional, it was pro bono work that I did. We took over a defunct Archdiocese Cincinnati school, and I can tell you, we're out there hustling. We're out putting flyers on doors. We're talking to folks. We're canvassing. We got radio spot ads in Spanish language radio. We're going to the community. I, generally speaking, around the country, do not see that level of hustling, if you will, that hunger, that zeal for souls when we look at our schools, so that it creates a demand issue. Marketing, I was dismayed. I don't know, all of you have probably read this and understand this report, but in December of 2018, Fatica, NCEA teamed up to do this big report. I was dismayed because most Catholic parents were more concerned about getting their kids into a good college or a good job versus transmission of the faith. But having said that, that report it teased out some interesting data points, which is that many school parents don't perceive the ability to afford the Catholic schools. And on the bullet point number 3 is that based on the real data, such as facts or other tuition management and information systems, there has to be a reconciliation between the true ability of the parents and the families to pay and the actual cost to educate at the schools. It sounds so fundamental, and it is, but the fact of the matter is that so often, and I know that, Kevin, you've implemented there's no choice but to have a tuition management system. Many dioceses don't mandate a particular management system, so we often get the case where if the pastor's the one making a decision, it's time to curry favor with Father Peter because he's going to be nice to me, or I'm going to sing a sob story. And I don't mean to be callous or uncharitable, but it's fascinating to see how much discretion, and not in a good way all the time, is given to the pastor who may or may not have a sense of what it means, the actual cost to educate a child. The same holds true for a principal. So if the principal is more in that role of having to decide or able to decide, then it's fascinating to see how they'll give away the tuition-based product. And then it really hurts so many things in the school and its finances. And so our point here is simply to say that there has to be a good system, whatever that might be, to enable real data-driven or data-informed decisions on tuition and other aspects. Now, if a family loses their job, if the main breadwinner loses their job, of course, we're advocating that they have that conversation, be it with the principal, the business manager, or the pastor. What we're saying is there has to be a system and a process versus just trying to curry favor with a principal or a pastor and getting a great deal and maybe not even being involved in the parochial life of that school. This is a little bit of a different take, but similar information that basically there's a lot of non-attending Catholic families that would probably look to attend if they knew that tuition assistance or some sort of support was available. This gets into a little bit of the pricing of tuition, so I don't want to make it too technical, but basically if we can think of higher education and they play that game of, the retail or the sticker price versus a net, we do that often. So it gets a very transactional sort of perspective in our schools versus being able to sell them, the parents, the prospective customers, if you will, on the beauty and the attraction, the reason and differentiating versus just doing price-based competition. And if we are going to get into the price-based competition, then let's make sure that we're selling it properly, because what you don't want to do is, you ask for 100, expecting 50, you settle at 75, and it just doesn't help portray the right image of what you're trying to do there, because then you're saying, okay, somebody got a discounted rate, and parents all talk to each other, as we all know. So it's about being intentional, and to be intentional, you have to have information. Here, Kevin allowed us to share this slide with you, which really on the left-hand graph shows you, in essence, that for the most part, schools were as a whole unsustainable, the majority of them, not all of them, but a good set of them. So there was obviously something going on with the operating deficits that were not able to be covered or covered over time by the parish and or by tuition. So and then on the right-hand side, we have the enrollment graph. So it's not just a matter of finances and enrollment, and this is where I can say this with full candor and objectivity, that this is a graph that very few diocesan leaders or school superintendents or chief financial officers at a diocese or bishops want to see or understand or even get. Now, the reason why I use this is because this tells a really important story that there is something fundamentally wrong going on. And yes, an individual school within a given archdiocese or diocese may be flourishing, but overall, these trends are obviously not sustainable. This is one of the motivations when we're trying to cause the catalyst for change, right? Because a lot of times you'll get a pastor who either is running a decent school and is fine, or kind of likes it the way they have it and isn't really worried about, improving the school too much. And the same thing is true for a principal potentially, and saying, okay, well, why do we really need to change? We've been doing this for 50 years, 100 years. Do we really need to change? And do we really need to change now? And, you guys are exaggerating and all that sort of rhetoric. And when we show this, it starts saying, okay, we're using the data from your schools over the last however many years. And notice that this is Detroit, where coming out of the crisis of 2008 through, say, 2011, there's been a resurgence. There's been a boom. So the economics have been not exactly bad for Detroit prior to COVID. Yes, there has been a demographic hollowing out, but there's also rejuvenation occurring. So we use this information to help set up the conversation to say, this isn't us just inventing things this is using your school data. And in this case, we mapped out all nearly 50 K through 8 schools to then form this. So it wasn't just some big picture Excel, it was actually bottom up driven. And this is what the modeling that we do. Here, in terms of the solution, now you've got the attention of the folks you're talking to, hopefully, and you say, okay, let's start looking at solutions. We all know the causes, I think we know. So let's take the 3-stool approach. And I say 3-stool, not 3 legs. because each one of these components has a different set of dimensions to it. So Proudly Catholic, we've talked about that. Again, I'm not a theologian, I'm not an educator even, I'm just a Catholic entrepreneur that's been doing this for a bit and cares a lot, and we use the best of tools and techniques God's given us. So academically excellent, I'll leave it to the educators, Kevin, Mary Pat, others on the call that are much more versed in that, and then financially accessible and sustainable. So the differences between accessibility is can you recruit the parents and students and families, and can that school be made sustainable? So similar but different questions. And those are two vitally important ones for all the pastors that have schools to understand. So once we have that, this is where I say, almost sounds like what's in Scripture, there's nothing new under the sun, right? And so this isn't really anything new, and I don't think any pastor on this call would say, wow, Carlos, thank you so much. But it is really the integral framework, and the fact that for all too often or for too long, we've operated as silos. And so the school's doing its own thing, the parish is doing its own thing, the chancery is doing its own thing. And when you start looking at this in a more comprehensive, integral way, I think it starts making sense, and then leveraging each area. So at the 12 o'clock area is the increased about accountability and capacity building. Simply put, I think it was Msgr Pilato, who I don't know, but he made a great point on accountability. He goes, having those monthly meetings with that principal, being the pastor, is going to increase that accountability. And it's not a gotcha. It's we're in this together. I don't want any negative surprises, or I want to be able to say, great job, thank you, to that principal, that business manager, whoever the person is. Capacity building means, does the organization at the school site have the basic tools to actually have the capacity to analyze? We often see that finances are driven by a very budgetary mentality. That budgetary mentality, and here I'll go a little bit philosophical with you, is based on a fixed number. So in other words, I'm a school principal, I'm a school pastor. I have a budget of 100. Instead of in the private sector, you say, okay, I need to create value, not just work off a fixed amount. So then it becomes a very backward looking or very zero sum mentality versus a very creative mentality. That's the sort of capacity building that we have to incorporate. And then the better operating models is that, for the most part, we're not saying to jettison or destroy all the parochial based school models. It works in some areas, but asking why does it work? Is it based on having the perfect trifecta of a great pastor who's got a great principal, who has a great business manager, who lives in a great area, or maybe even not in a great area, but they're doing all the right things and they're making it work? Is that it? Is it worth looking at a hybrid model? Is it worth looking at a micro school model? But you can only do that if you have the operating systems at the school to let you know if you're doing well or not, and having those signals tell you if a decision was good or not. So when that pastor decides to make a concession for a needy family on tuition, how does that translate to the rest of the school finances? Active tuition management. So what we mean here is that, again, I mentioned this, the delta, the difference between the retail versus the net, and how do we go about that? Is it a default? Is it a very passive aspect, or is it an active management of tuition, saying not everybody has to pay the same amount? Let me give you a story, a true one, unfortunately, where the pastor, I think, had the right intention. He's a good man, very solid faith pastor, cares tremendously about the school, and said schools are a high fixed operating proposition. We all know that. It's like a hotel or like flying a plane, whether you're flying 10 people across the country or 150 people. It's going to be essentially the same fixed cost. So his premise, as well intentioned as it was disastrous for the finances, because he says, come as you are, pay what you can. And he didn't say when you can, but that's in essence what happened. Well, not only did it ruin his school, because you basically had this tremendous amount of demand rushing in, but then it ruined all the pricing capacity of the schools around him. And he did this pretty much in solitary, without consulting anybody and without having those school systems, the operating systems or the capacity to manage and understand that. So we're not advocating of having a one-size-fits-all tuition. What we are saying is that unless that there's intentionality that has information behind that decision-making, it can be very destructive, not only to that particular institution and school, but then to those around him. And by the way, just a sequel is that the pastor that took over from that other one, he's having to now crawl out of about $1 million worth of debt and rebuild a school and rebuild a pricing discipline. And he's a very fair man, and it's been a really, really tough slog for him. At the 6 o'clock, we have the increased prayer support. In some cases, under the parochial school model, you have the prayer support. What we do is we actually map, and we show indications over usually a 3 or 5 year trend as to the level of parish support as measured by offertory or revenues that are going to a school. And we're not saying that it should or should not be. What we are saying is, number one, understanding that and understanding that amount of support over time is really important. Moreover, we also advocate of the parish support, and I think Father Stravinskas, you mentioned it, is involving those school families in the life of the parish, because really, if all we're doing is running a good school that's divorced from the life of the parish, that's not really a win in our book and in our minds. It's about integrating the two, but being astute and being wise about how to deploy those sacrificial resources that are being given from a parish, but also integrating some of the activities. And then on about the 7 o'clock, the greater centralized marketing and development. This gets into issues of subsidiarity, and we are huge fans of subsidiarity. We also think that there are some areas that could be better handled by a more centralized sort of role. So for example, are we really marketing our Catholic schools? That's something that could probably be better done with a good diocesan-led effort, assuming that those are competent, and good, solid professionals that are faith-filled and authentically Catholic professionals at the diocese, versus having 50 different schools trying to do their own marketing. That doesn't take away from the local marketing and the engagement of the small business owners, of your parishioners, of the community organizations, of the local chambers of commerce. It does speak to the fact that there can be a unifying central message of for example, the benefits of a Catholic education that would apply to every school. Development efforts, fundraising. Often we see, and the story was used, or the example was shared, of a development director that couldn't cover their own salary. That's ridiculous. Normally, any sort of decent development person should raise at least 3 times their all-in compensation. So these are the sort of specifics that we have seen that we advocate of for this purpose. Then in terms of the re-examining the governance dynamics, what we say there is that with the vocational crisis in most dioceses or most parts of the country, there are less priests, less pastors to take care of either the same and sometimes less for schools. But the point is that they're being stretched so thin already that we have to be able to support our pastors with information, with technical expertise. But of course, one always defers to the pastor. So whether it's a board of administrative limited jurisdiction, of administrative oversight, if it's a governing board, there's different modalities and ways to handle that. Not to mention the succession planning that was touched upon earlier in this seminar, whereby almost by definition, again, depending on the ordinary's dispositions, there may be a date certain rotational change of that pastor for that school, and that succession and those systems have to be put in place to make sure that school continuity continues. So I've been speaking a lot, and I always try to ensure that I'm not just talking too much. So let me pause here for a second and field any sort of questions from anyone on anything we've covered so far before we get into some continued solutions and more technical aspects.
Comments, fathers?
I would just comment, excellent presentation. A couple of the earlier issues about the press contacting the school or the parish with a question. It's certainly the policies in the Archdiocese. We refer them to the communications office for the Archdiocese. Pastors and principals don't talk to reporters. So, could be good or bad. Yeah, but that's our policy. But those are great issues to bring up.
Thank you, Monsignor. Yeah, in this case, they have a temporary communications director, so that's tough, and they're already under the gun for a bunch of lawsuits for different reasons. So, but your point is well taken. Having said that, it's interesting to me how sometimes you get these young school leaders that unless that policy from the Chancery is understood and enforced, then they might have that temptation to go out or just out of naivete and start saying things that are probably not going to be very well contextualized or accurately reported by the secular press.
Right, we've had that situation, and we have our share of lawsuits in spite of it all. So,
excellent. Well, I will then proceed and hope and pray that I'm not boring you to death. So,
Nobody's fallen asleep yet.
Carlos?
yes, Father.
I have a question in terms of the budgetary mentality. Certainly, that is something that I have inherited, I think, here in the parish and the school, that the budget drives so many things within the parish and the school. Could you elaborate more? And by the way, wonderful presentation. Could you elaborate more on this, how to perhaps improve that or change it or shift to that model that you presented?
Certainly, Father. This will get a little bit abstract potentially, but let me try to make it very concrete. So first, the budget is vitally important. So I don't want to diminish or dismiss the importance of the budgetary mentality. But so one, what is the budget process? I happen to know your school superintendent and your diocese, and so I can speak with some level of insight here. But I think, for example, the fact that a budget is a moment in time for a fixed period versus having tools that are more predictive. And then so instead of looking back or looking at the current period, is to be able to say, what is my enrollment now? But more importantly, what do I expect it to be? And then how does that then backward translate into informing my budget for future years? And that then was going to show your staffing levels or your recruitment or both, as well as the cost to educate. And so what I mean, Father Andrew, is that in essence, too much time, finances usually is in the mindset of a pastor or a principal, the budget. Yes and no. The budget is vitally important, but we have to have predictive tools and capabilities and not just be reacting all the time. Moreover, when you start taking an analytical look at the budgets, but being predictive, you can start saying, do I think it's realistic that a $7,500 retail tuition price for my area, being on the fringe area of Grosse Pointe in a very, not exactly a great socioeconomic area, is that going to be realistic? And by the way, the other thing is that sometimes we've seen it's very naive and disingenuous to say, oh, a pastor or principal, oh, we're going to fundraise, the fundraise, gap. That's not really realistic unless you have a proven capacity or a real plan to do so. And so I don't want to be dismissive of some of these processes, but what I mean, Father Andrew, is that the budget should not be the be-all and end-all of finances. Finances should incorporate the budget, but moreover, there should be an understanding of the analysis of the budget and why. And that usually depends on the pastor's formation or training in the area. It depends on the principal's competency in a budgetary matter. It depends on the business manager's capacity and involvement. And we often have the case where a business, at least in the parochial school model, which many of you operate under, where that business manager may or may not be very good. They may be a glorified bookkeeper and not trying to be uncharitable, but they don't have the financial analysis capacity to explain to you and to summarize to you, the pastor, who's ultimately responsible, as to what they recommend or why this is or why this is not. And that's what I mean by it shouldn't just be budgetary. It should be more comprehensive, more strategic, more intentional, to be forward-looking and predictive versus just a moment in time looking back and being reactive. Does that make sense, Father Andrew?
Thank you.
Certainly. So unless there's any more questions with that, I'll carry on. So here, the point was made by Msgr Pilato, and I don't know him, never met him, but it was funny because he said it's fascinating to see how many pastors and principals don't understand that, if you don't have any money, you're not going to have any mission. Now, I confess to all of you that being a 54-year-old guy raised in the 70s and the 80s, and have only been trying to become serious about our wonderful faith over the last 20, 25 years of my age, of our time, that I can be accused of having Pelagian tendencies and things, things like that. I'm a proud person, not in a good way. So it is fundamental, though, to have a self-understanding of the school, and for principals and pastors that often say, you just don't understand, it's about the kids. You just don't understand, it's about the faith. I say, actually, I do understand that very well. And the reason why we started a company 9 years ago was because we wanted you to reach more souls for Christ, but to do it sustainably and not hiding behind a veneer of poor managerial or temporal practices to say it's all about the kids. So there's nothing like a fundamental walkthrough of just the revenues. You're either going to have a surplus or a deficit. In the old days, the diocese used to cover it without too much of a problem, or the congregation used to, if it was a well-to-do area. And then you build a balance sheet or destroy it. And then what do? Do you reinvest in the mission, or do you save it for the future? What do you do? And then if you have a deficit and you don't have any historical surpluses and you can't any longer fulfill your mission, then you go out of business. So how many souls are you reaching for Christ, and how many children and families and communities are you touching if you close down? And by the way, these closures are usually not done real well. And they come, Kevin and a couple of other superintendents that we work with get those calls. Literally, Kevin, I'm not going to be able to make payroll. Can you help me? It's like, okay, well, that would have been nice to have spoken, a few weeks ago or a few months ago. And that's, again, where we get into the predictive capacity of the tools at the parochial level or at the diocesan level. So with that, we get into now being able to understand the steps and methodology. I use a joke that says, why did it take the church 500 years to recognize Saint Joan of Arc as a saint, right? We just celebrated her the anniversary here. And so, well, because there's a process. Now, process does not remove the importance of persons or personalities. Father Stravinskas, I'm sure that without your personality, you would not have been able to found the Catholic Education Foundation some time ago. Having said that, there is a process. So it's not just about the Father Peter show. You've invited a lot of folks to have a say and get insight and share information. So we say the same thing when we do our work. There's a process. So part of that process has to do with baseline data. Where are we? Quo vadis? We can't know where we're going if we don't know where we are. And it's like the Alcoholics Anonymous, where you say, okay, the first thing I have to do is acknowledge that I have a problem. And then the second thing is, look, how do I solve it? So you have to have that information on enrollment, on data, on good alignment. I'm not going to cover these verbatim. I'm happy to give this presentation to you, or it should be shared. So I want you to just challenge anything I'm saying, or have it spark thinking in your minds as you take over those schools, as you look to better steward those schools. The second part is discussing some of the processes that I was talking about. So get that baseline data, have a process then for determining what information is missing. And we're amazed when you don't have basic information on, say, for example, forecasted enrollment for the coming year. It doesn't mean you're going to hit it or not, but it talks about the intentionality and who's accountable for what. Make sure those principles are involved. And so another part of the problem is, sorry, I'm just getting an email from Mario. And so what I'll do is, bear with me 1 second while I just tell him that he should dial in if he's not on already. Mario, I don't know if you can hear me or not. Okay, perfect. So, Mario, we ended up starting a bit early, so
Okay.
that's why. So just continuing with our presentation so there's a process, making sure that you're testing some of those methodologies, and there's analysis. So you get the information, now there's an analytical process. And this, again, is where maybe the business manager is very insightful and she's been there for 20 years and she can help the pastor, or maybe he doesn't have a clue and he's some person that's been there for a long time and is not really analyzing. So it's not just about that, it's about gathering the information, it's about analysis. So ensure that there's a qualitative review. So to give you another example, there could be that a school was performing very, very well. All of a sudden, a new pastor comes in and the school starts deteriorating. Well, what is the issue? So is it that the new pastor is doing something differently or not doing something that should be being done? Is it that the business manager changed after 20 years and had a bunch of good information that then is now lost, or the capability to analyze? And understanding the limits of that analysis, and then having that, what I mentioned, again, the predictive analytics and recommendations. In the Catholic world, we're famous for pointing out problems but not developing great solutions, or if we develop solutions, they're very ethereal or esoteric at times versus kind of practical. And again, I don't want to limit or truncate imagination, but at the same time saying we have to have actionable tools that we give you, our pastors, to better steward those schools. And that's just the last process here, point, which is to really understand and be very concrete about the action steps and the follow-ups, and that's about accountability. So to give you another visual, what we like to do is really saying that financial model is on the left-hand side, you have the financial statements, and then you have some of the operational data. So that operational data can be, for example, the cost to educate, the true cost to educate each child. Obviously, it's going to depend on your enrollment, but there's going to be some trends that you can look at. You can look at also the number of students per grade, because that's going to tell you if you're light or if you're heavy in a given school. Therefore, you can predict if you're going to have a problem or if you have to recruit for a certain area. And then putting that into the school plans, because none of what we do is meant to supplant or drive school plans. In fact, it's the other way around. All we do is try to say, this is what is historically, this is what is currently, financially speaking, and operationally. What are your school plans? For example, Mary Pat gave the example of when she took her school at St. Jerome and they put the plan together. Well, that's when you just make the financial model, make sure that that is sustainable. So as finances, we don't drive things. We're here to support. Finance is nothing more than a manifestation of the action decisions that have been taken. And then this is the financial model, and here's a little bit of a qualitative representation of what that is, so you can visually and conceptually see this, but with some granularity. So for example, historical enrollment trend by grade, again, that points to, is there a particular teacher that's very, very good, and therefore she's having just a ton of success in recruiting, or that the word's gotten out, so therefore, Mrs. Smith's second grade class is very popular, and that you can see that. You can look at the tuition and fees per student, other revenue like fundraising, for example. Staffing model or staffing levels is really important, and somebody else said it earlier in the seminar, how there is a tendency, I don't think inherently bad, but there is that tendency of a school administrator, school educator to say, we just need more money. 9 times out of 10, when we ask, what do you need? We just need more money and everything would be okay. Well, that's not really true. And whether one wants to get into it from the Catholic anthropology of the human person, understanding how that's never going to work, and I don't care if you're the federal government and you can actually print money, or if you're a Catholic school, St. Clair Shores, and you don't have the ability to print money, and you don't, you can throw all the money in the world at a problem, but unless you have a good solution, it's not going to work. It's not going to, it might cover the Band-Aid for a while. And that's our concern with the paycheck protection programs, that it was a temporary salve, or it provided some breathing room, but hopefully that breathing room and that time is being used prudently to make difficult decisions and true assessments of the situation, versus just to say, oh, then we're going to go back hat in hand and ask for another round of bailouts from somebody and hope and pray it comes. In the center is the adjustments. Once you have that accuracy of information and some of that data, now you can start setting your enrollment expectations and pricing expectations by pricing, for example, in tuition or other areas, but primarily tuition. And then really just saying, okay, well, it really disheartens us and concerns us when we talk about Catholic schools being better than the public schools because we have a 10-to-1 ratio. Well, that may or may not be the case, but all of you that are probably 40 years or older know that those nuns had the capacity to keep everybody in line. Now, there was a lot of different factors. Parents were there, society was different, and there was more respect for authority. Having said that, the way to compete is not to brag about your low your low teacher-student ratio. It's about the efficacy and the impact, because a 10-to-1 ratio is great if you're doing a micro school model or you've got a tailored hybrid model. It is not good if you're trying to run a system of diocesan schools that need usually around 25, 26 to make it break even. And that's the number we use. And by the way, interestingly, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, which I'm not a big fan of because of their mistaken view of the human person and contraception and all that, but they do some very good research, and they are sincere about educational options and choices. And their research even manifests that, usually up to about 26, 27 students per teacher are completely okay without any sort of learning deterioration. Again, professionals like Kevin and others can correct me if I'm wrong, but that's what we've seen. So when we brag about 10-to-1, we're just bragging about something that isn't grounded in necessarily reality, may or may not be aligned with our model, and usually it's destroying the economics.
Well, also, the other point to make, Carlos, is that, as a matter of fact, some research suggests you can go as high as 40. Once you go above 5 or 6, there's no change really in learning ability. But it's also very often we're fond of saying we like it small when it's small, but we really would like it to be much bigger, and so we play that numbers game.
Great point, Father. Thank you. And in fact, we just concluded a market assessment study to analyze whether a Catholic classical education school made sense in a very urban area, the urban archdiocese. And one of the fascinating things that we saw, and much of this was touched on earlier today by Kevin and Mary Pat and others that chimed in, including you, Father Stravinskas, was that a lot of the parents seek community. And by the way, some of these parents were authentically, solidly Orthodox Catholic families, but others were just intellectually pure or intellectually objective secular folks. And some are probably even, when using political monikers, left of center, but yet saw the value of the integral approach to Catholic classical education, to search for good, truth, and beauty, and not the ruining of innocence that's often the case. Point being that we can get up to whether it's 40, 26. That's how we use our model. What that does, it's not about whether it's 26 or 27, but it does force an honest conversation between the pastor, the business manager, and then the principal to say, how are you staffed? And what are those people doing? And are they effective or not? And that's what we like to do, is we really like to spark the conversation, having that honest discussion. So we don't come in and parachute in and saying, this is what you need to be doing, full stop. And then this is where what we do is we use this information in a summary way to provide Kevin or the pastors In other words, the superintendents or the pastors, the tools to say, have that honest, data-driven, objective conversation, because there could be good examples. And I'll give you a very specific example that one of the best things a Catholic school can do is to be able to differentiate itself in the way it takes care of a special needs student. Well, in some dioceses, there are more special needs concentrated schools. So it could be the case that you have a lower teacher to student ratio because necessarily, and by the way, a higher cost function because you have to have those assistants or you have to have those specially qualified language therapists. In some of our inner city school work, both Catholic and non-Catholic, it's really fascinating because when you get kids that are coming in below grade level, and usually by third grade, it's determining you're getting from high poverty, broken home areas. You're going to have more trauma counselors. You're going to have more after school help and remedial support facilities. So we don't look at things just from a strictly financial and saying, oh, if it doesn't fit this, it's got to be, you got to get to this level, period. What we do is help the pastor or superintendent or principal and the business manager have that informed conversation and understanding the why. No silver bullets, whether it's our politicians or others, including sometimes our Episcopal leaders, they want silver bullets. And we don't try to complicate things. We provide solutions, but it has to be a more nuanced and understanding conversations. And when you look at the school, it's not just about tuition, it's about the development, what is the level of support, and it's also about expenses. And what we find is a lot of little things done intentionally over time make a difference. So it's usually not going to be, I'm going to win the lottery or I'm going to fundraise my way out of this or I'm going to get a big benefactor. If it happens, praise be to God, enjoy it. But it's not the norm. On the managed tuition, and this is said, it was interesting before you start reading any of this, we were once working in a diocesan engagement, and he's an educator by heart, and he's now the bishop of a diocese, and he said to his priest, and I was shocked at his level of candor, and almost sounded like a business guy talking, and it was an entirely appropriate comment. He said, we cannot even give away our product. And so they had been discounting for years, ruining the finances for the entire diocese, and he just was not able to subsidize or support the school any further, or the schools any further, about roughly 50 schools. And so you have to have an attractive product. It's got to be differentiated. Financial aid, tuition support, whatever one wants to dub it. How is it being used? Is it used intentionally? Do you have the specifics to understand that? Spare capacity. If you do have a bunch of empty seats in a classroom, you don't want to do what I said, which is, hey, just open it up to anybody who will come. You can then have some financial understanding and benefits to saying anybody that pays an extra $1 is going to help offset my fixed cost. That is true. But again, you have to have the systems and the intentionality to do that. And then to be able to say, is this area of the country, or is this area of the city, or this area of the archdiocese, is it suffering from demographics that are never going to bounce back, and should we be making different decisions? And then again, having those sound operating and governance systems. Here, what we did was put together a few different examples of schools. I'm not going to ask you to read these, but just so you can see the different models. Wichita has been mentioned. It's often mentioned, but what folks fail to understand, and I think Peter, you probably know this better than most, it's over time and it's sustained. It's not something that happens overnight. And by the way, it has to have the buy-in of the Episcopal leader, but also the bottom-up effort of all of you, the priests and the pastors that are executing.
But I would also say, and it started there with one parish, and I think that's the point that needs to be made. So yes, it's taken, it's been sustained over a long period of time, but it started in one place and then it spread. And I always make the point: there's been no reformation in the history of the church that's ever been led by the hierarchy, and so it has always been something that's bottom up. But unfortunately, given the miserable seminary training that is given, most priests are trained to be followers, not leaders, and therefore they're always looking to the man with the pointed hat to give them some direction. And meanwhile, he's looking somewhere else for someone to give him direction.
Exactly. This is one of the things that when we're saying, if you're waiting for the cavalry to come in the way of the bishop or somebody else, don't wait. Because really, they're asking you for solutions. And by the way, I'd have it no other way. If I'm a pastor or a principal, yes, it's difficult, but who at the end of the day has the best information and best position to affect change? That person closest to the action. Subsidiarity 101. By the way, Father Peter, that's our second bullet point in the Wichita model there, the spread from one parish to a handful, then to the diocese. So you're absolutely correct. So many of you may have heard of Peter Drucker. He died not that long ago. He was a Christian, not Catholic, but an excellent. He's considered one of the gurus, for good reason, of modern management and techniques. He's very, very philanthropic. And this is one of the things that he used to say. So we are not arrogant enough to say that we know exactly what to do for every case, but when you have information, when you have systems, when you have a process, then you can make some of those informed guesses and pray and say, okay, God, I've done all I can, now it's up to you. And then this is where we get into, there's only going to be 2 more slides, Mario, so if you want to start queuing up, and then I'll be happy to take questions after Mario presents his information. But basically, I said it earlier, and I'll say it again now, that it's almost like the spiritual life. Father Stravinskas, you mentioned somebody being, overweight and needing to change their diet. Well, if I'm overweight, it's pretty likely that I know that I'm overweight, but I just don't know. One, I have to have an acknowledgement. There's an awareness. 2, I have to have a desire to change. And then the second thing is, like, how do I plan for that change? What am I going to start changing when I go to the store, to the grocery store? Am I going to go hungry? Am I going to start reading nutritional pamphlets and bring my list ahead of time and limit myself? And then the support for change. Is my wife going to continue, cooking these wonderful pastas with French sauces and stuff like that? Are my kids going to be keeping a bunch of candy around the house? And then really the action implementation. I say this because in the Archdiocese of Detroit, they did it well and did it correctly, in that the first thing that Archbishop Vigneron did, and I think, Kevin, this is even like a year or 2 before you came on board, is he undertook a synod and really a prayerful discernment, and he got a lot of input from all over the diocese, bottom up, and informed his plan. And then Kevin, as he showed us a pamphlet, is Unleashing Our Catholic Schools, put together to say, okay, aligned with my ordinary's view and vision and this work that's been done already, let me now conform this to the schools. And then within that, now you undertake a change management process. And by the way, there will be collateral damage, because not a lot of people, we as humans, generally speaking, don't like to change. And so we have to have an awareness, but then we actually have to have the ability or the desire to change, in addition to having that awareness. And then the planning with data, with information, with systems to support that change over time, and then to actually implement and the actual implementation. The final slide here is the fact that it requires both management and leadership. And this is how we distinguish it, because all too often, especially in Catholic circles, whether it's a priest or a principal or even our bishops say, just make it happen, without really looking at some of the concretes or some of the details or some of the grunt work that needs to be undertaken to actually make it happen. And by the way, you're going to encounter resistance. So it's about being able to say, okay, that didn't work. Let's redirect. If there was an honest mistake made, or if the data is coming back differently, then you redirect. Not a big deal. In the private sector, we do that all the time. There's so many mistakes that are made, but that's how you learn. In the Catholic world, and I think educators and pastors in particular, there's a fear of risk. There's a fear of like, oh, I'm not the be-all, know-all. And that's an error, because it leads to either that insecurity can lead to really big mistakes not being acknowledged or corrected up front, whereas sometimes that actual acknowledgement or that course correction early on can be very, very valuable, or serve to inform others, other parishes, other schools, or even the chancery to say, look, you came down with this policy on tuition, but this is not working for that reason. To have that communication is important. Requires systems management and leadership. Sorry, this is the final one. None of this matters if there isn't good accountability, governance, the proper folks in the right places, and the willingness to adapt. All this sounds very banal, and it is to some extent, but right people in the right places, the Catholicity, that fervor and the zeal for souls, are they in the right place? Because they can be a really fervent pastor, but if he doesn't care about finances and he doesn't have a good business manager and he doesn't have a good finance counsel, that could ruin the school. The willingness to adapt and to make those honest assessments and corrections along the way. And then the accountability and governance. Again, accountability is not about gotcha. It's about what tools do you need to be successful. And if you're not being successful, understanding the why, and is that lack of success or lack of achieving on the agreed upon goals acceptable or not? Is it reasonable or not? So with that, I just want to conclude and just thank you for the opportunity to share some of this practitioner knowledge with you. Feel free to challenge anything I said. We believe in healthy conflict. I can only learn from you. I hope that we've shared some knowledge with you. And Kevin, I don't know, Father Stravinskas, you and Kevin, if you want to give this information or you can reach me, that's fine. But I hope it's been helpful. And with that, I'll turn it over to my co-presenter, Mario.
Yeah,
Thanks
thank
so
you very
much,
much,
Carlos.
Yeah, thank you very much. I'm gonna, my presentation will be much shorter. I'm gonna try to share my screen now. I think I can. Let me see. Share. Can you all see my screen right now? Okay. If I do this, everybody can see it, right? Perfect. All right. Well, thank you, everybody. So now it's nap time, and it's going to be extremely hard. It's very. I'm honored. I have my cigar buddy there, Monsignor Chadel. You should light your cigar. If you light your cigar, I'll light my cigar as well now. Okay, and I'll keep hiding my glass of scotch. All right, but I'm in New Hampshire. So behind this is my garden outside of my window. Here in New Hampshire, I rebuilt St. Peter. No, I'm just joking. I'm trying to keep you awake. But my internet connection here in New Hampshire is not as fancy as it is in Florida for Carlos. So sometime I'll freeze. Don't be afraid. I'm not going to go anywhere. Okay. And I am basically launching on what Carlos said at the end. Okay. Which is everything that Carlos said will not be worth it if, first and foremost, the pastor doesn't understand what it means to be a pastor. Okay, and here I'm going to start with a small story. You all know that I was a former Swiss Guard. I served under St. Pope John Paul II for 3.5 years. And after that, for 15 years, I was a financial advisor within the bank inside the Vatican. And so I got to know a lot of people over there, and I got to interact many times, first as his bodyguard, and then as a financial advisor with St. Pope John Paul II. And one time, he basically was addressing a small group of priests, okay? And during that address, I was standing behind him, okay? He was thanking them for their service. And that's what I'm doing as well as my introduction. I want to thank all of you for what you do for me every day, okay? And I want you to know that I pray for you as well as my 5 children and wife. And so St. Pope John Paul II was thanking the priests for their sacrifice for having accepted to say yes. And then he challenged the priest when he said, you will always be criticized no matter what you do. No matter what you say, somebody will always be against you. But that's part of the challenge of having said yes. But he said, please never forget what you were before you became a priest. Never forget what you were before you were a priest. And so when he said that, he really caught my attention. And then he said, in order for you to be a good priest, you don't have to do more. You have to be more. And that's what I've been trying to do all my life, fulfilling my baptismal commitments, my beloved new friends. I'm not trying to do more, I'm trying to be more. And so in this 15 minutes presentation that I wanted to give you as on the opening that Carlos gave me, I want to remind you that, as you can see on my slide, the church is responsible for the financial resources which have been entrusted to it. The responsibility, safeguarding, prudence, accountability, church and the regulatory authorities in compliance with all civil regulation. This is very clear. It's what I call plain vanilla. But to me, what is very important is the first canon that some of you probably forgot when you heard that in seminary, or some of you maybe even carries a JCL or STD and you forgot about it. But Canon Law 532 says that the pastor's responsibility with respect to administering the temporal goods refers to these three segments. Okay? In all the juridic affairs that the pastors represents the parish, okay? In every parish, each parish is in a canon law a public juridic person, distincting from the diocese. And then the Canon Law 532 also says that because the parish is independent of, but dependent on the diocese, the relationship between the two entities has been and continues to be a source of tension. I believe that nobody disagrees with this statement, right? We are in constant tension. While I'm talking to you here in New Hampshire, I have a bishop who's a friend of mine who's been vacationing here. I'll spare you to tell you his name, but I've been spending a lot of cigar time in Glenlivet trying to listening to him, sharing with me situation where with the pastors, especially in matters of schools, he has no communication. And he made a point to me last night, my beloved friends, when he said, Mario, when the papers arrive on my desk, it has gone through so many people, so much time has been spent. What am I supposed to do? If everybody is advising me to close the school, what am I supposed to do? Send it back? It should be that arrives on my desk, not already with such a clear statement. So I want you, fathers, to think about the 1284. The canon of 1284, and I need you to share this with your friends that are not here today. If you're associate, please allow them to go and reread it. Canon 1284, all I care is what I put in red, which means that the administrators are bound to fulfill their function with the diligence of a good householder. And this is what partially the intent of Father Peter that he's been doing every year, this workshop, this seminary, is to try to show to you that there are a lot of ways for you to find support. There are a lot of tools out there that they can be at your disposal, but everything, support and tools, they come your way. They come so that you are going to fulfill the function to administer with the diligence of a good householder. Now, if you look at these 9 points, okay, I don't want to bore you to death, okay, but the one that I like is number 7, which says, keep well-organized books of receipts and expenditures. Well, here is my question. If a pastor doesn't know how to read books because he has no idea what a balance sheet is, how can he fulfill the diligence of a good householder if everything is in organized books? He has no idea what it means. Well, what is important to me is that we have to receive the humility of understanding that in any parish, you have to have a finance council which is governed by norms that are issued by your local bishop, and the task of the finance council is not to tell you what to do, is not for you to have an excuse to blame somebody, but is actually an organization, an institution, and conglomerate of specialists that are there to assist you in the administration of the goods of the parish, a school, or the parish, the apostolates, whatever, without prejudice to the prescript of the Canon Law 532 that I showed you in the beginning. Now, I sit in, and I did sit in several parish council and even finance council at the diocesan level. I am definitely not a phlegmatic melancholic. I am actually, like Father Peter, a very sanguine choleric kind of guy. And it's very hard for me to keep my mouth shut if somebody doesn't say the truth. And if I detect that, without trying to be arrogant or a bully, without sounding that I'm loud, okay, I'm Italian, so I am loud by nature, I always try to make sure that concepts are explained so that the priest or the bishop can make the decision based on knowledge. And so in one specific case, I was at a conference where there was a panel of 4 bishops. And at a certain point, one of the bishops started attacking the laity, saying everything that is going on in the financial misconduct is also the laity responsibility because they knew and they didn't say anything. They saw and they didn't say anything. They heard and they didn't say anything. And so when he was saying all of these, my beloved priest, I almost raised my hand, but because we were at the conference with almost 500 people, I didn't want to embarrass myself. And so I said to the Lord, Lord, I really need to say something to the Archbishop. If you put him on my way somewhere, I think I will. And the next day, sure enough, he was at my table for breakfast. And so I asked Archbishop, can I say something referring to what you mentioned yesterday about the laity co-responsibility or full responsibility? And he said, sure. And I said, so here is my question for you, Archbishop. Who appoints the laity in the finance council? And he answered, the priest does. I do. So I did this with my head. And then I asked again, I love that Father light his cigar. That's awesome. And then I said, one more time, Archbishop, who appoints the people in your finance council? And he said, I do. And I said, so here you are telling me that people knew, people heard, people saw, but they didn't say anything. Well, my rebuttal to you is, because you appointed the people, you chose people that you knew they would not have said something after having heard or read about it. And he said, how dare you to say something like that? And I said to him, well, in the corporate world, which is where I come from, okay, if all of a sudden I realize that I am the smartest man in the room, I am in the wrong room, Excellency. I don't stay in that room because they are not going to help me fulfill my mission. And what are the Finance Council key duties? Here you can see them. Help the pastor make financial decisions and establishing annual operating budget for the parish and for the school. Create operating and capital budgets. Provides parishioner with a budget report, but that has to be clear and explanatory so that you don't create any misunderstanding. And so I told the Archbishop, to me, today in the United States, there is the three-leg stool. And the three-leg stool policy says that a good parish stewardship requires an engaged pastor, an engaged finance council, and a knowledgeable business manager or bookkeeper. And I put between parentheses, this can be the most tricky because you probably tell me how many times you moved from one parish to another, you arrived there, and the parish business manager or secretary, he or she been there already 30 years. You are just one coming and soon you leave. You have no idea. They don't use QuickBook. They still use the butcher paper, that I grew up in Italy. When I will go and get the T-bone steak, you will wrap it. They still do accounting on a pencil. And it's extremely complicated for you to understand if they actually know what they're doing or not. And so the three-legged stool, and this is my core message, attaching it to what so beautifully Carlos explained in a conceptual way, is if one of these three elements is missing, things will get wobbly. If you're not an engaged pastor, if you have a finance council that you just appointed 6 mummies, for crying out loud, and if you don't have a relationship, hierarchically speaking, with respect of the human person, with your business manager or your bookkeeper, it is going to be extremely complicated to fulfill your mission. Now, in Lumen Gentium chapter 5, and this is my little homework for you tonight, you can read what the competencies and duties of the priest are and what the competencies and the duties of the laity are. I don't need to invent anything. I don't need to be creative or innovative. I just have to go back to the church document. And after I read it, in my mind came, okay, it's time to stop clericalizing the laity and laicizing the clergy. It's time to let the clergy be clergy and the laity be laity. But you have to understand, my beloved fathers, that I can help, but I cannot get as close to God without you. You don't need to read a financial statement. You don't need to really understand a P&L, but you've got to have an idea of how much money you have on the bank account. And it breaks my heart in the past 3 months, and Father Peter knows me quite well. In the past 3 months, I've seen many priests, and I went, I shook their hand, and I said, how are you doing, Father? And 99% of the answers that I got were, I'm doing great, my collection are up, I am not worried about. And I always said, Father, I wasn't asking you how your finances are. I am asking, how are you doing? So you see how the mind of your brother priest today is not settled, not tuned on what it really means to be more, but rather they are tuned on make more. Yes, look on my 3-point here. The pastor is responsible for all the decisions. Yes, the pastor is accountable for every penny earned and spent. Yes, the finance committee is not the master of the parish money. It is a planner with the pastor of the way that money is to be generated, is to be gathered, and has to be distributed. Remember, I'm a finance professor, and when I start a finance class, I always say finance means 3 things: to raise, save, and manage money. There is nothing wrong on raising money, saving money, and managing money. What it matters is the way you raise it, why you save it, and how you manage it. How many priests today are more focused on looking at the market, how the Dow Jones and the Nasdaq close on the day, so that they can go on their 403b and see if their money went up, and so on and so forth? There is nothing wrong to do that. Actually, I prefer a priest that follows the market rather than watch Netflix all day long because he has nothing to do. But ultimately, because you're responsible for all the decision, what I want you to take away from today, okay, is that budget as a theology, and this is my last slide. A budget is who you are. So for a finance guy like me, if I want to know who Father John Doe is, I don't need to look at his resume where I will see that he went to Seton Hall and then he went to the Gregorian and he has his STL and what he meant and maybe even as an STB or STD. I don't need to do that. I just need to see the budget. Once I look at the budget, I'll be able in less than 2 minutes to come out with a description of who the priest is. And what I'm trying to say to you is a budget for a school, for a parish, or for your own fathers, for your own personal finance fathers. You know how many priests today, they have $30,000, $40,000 on their bank account that they're not doing anything with. And that's wrong. It's absolutely wrong to have money on a bank account and put that coin under the ground when that coin should be put at work. Well, Mario, I don't know what to do. Fine, look down your church. There must be somebody that can help you so that that coin, you are not going to put it under the ground, running the risk that Jesus will come and call you fool. So a budget is a best estimate of what will happen based on what you know today. So yes, there is a theology behind the budget because it forces everybody to have a clear snapshot. That's how the students call it. You take a picture of the situation today so that you can ask yourself, am I going to come out tomorrow the same way that I went in today? Here is a nice question for you. Are you in your parish, in your religious order, in your school, are you going to come out of this crisis better than how you went in? Worse than how you went in? No difference of how you went in? Second point, it is not a weakness and not a mistake to not be able to hit the budget. You don't work for the budget. You are not a slave of the budget, but the budget is a benchmark that reroutes you every time that you check on it. And yes, you might arrive halfway and you are way off budget in plus or in minus. And guess what? You don't need to complain. You don't need to be scared. You just need to be more. You call your finance counsel. You open a dialogue trying to fix the situation. Number 3 is poor stewardship is approving a budget that does not accurately reflect what you know today. In other words, that Snapchat that I mentioned before. You have to have a clear understanding that if you wake up at 2 in the morning, you go down into your kitchen, you open the refrigerator, you take that slice of leftover turkey, and it's 2 o'clock, and you open a bottle of wine, and you say, let me just go on QuickBook, and let me just look at the P&L, profit and loss. I want to see how much money I have on the bank account. You have to be able to do that at 2 a.m. You don't need to be dependent of the business manager or of the bookkeeper, okay? So if you don't have that access, if you don't know what today is, how can you understand, approve, or respect a budget, right? That's what poor stewardship is. And in conclusion of my monologue, and please forgive my frankness, but I was challenged to keep you awake, okay? And so I decided to have my Jersey accent. And when I see some of you laughing, it makes my heart full of joy. And I'm going to ask you for a prayer for me. By the way, my father was taken by COVID. I am an only child. My mom lives in Bergamo, and my poor dad would have been 80 on Easter, and he died a week before and took COVID only 2 days to take him. And I can't get there. My mom had to go through everything on her own. So if in the next few weeks you have an opening for one of your messes, my dad's name was Alberto. If you can offer a mess for him, I will be grateful for you. But in conclusion, what I wanted to say is central to good stewardship is accountability and transparency. And yes, a good set of internal controls helps ensures that they are delivered. Accountability and transparency. We could do a 3 days workshop just on these 2 works. You probably agree with me, too much transparency can harm. Too little transparency can harm. Guess what? The Italians, they don't even have the word accountability. Call them stupid. They don't have that word. They have the word responsibility, but they do not have the word accountability. Call them stupid. Here is my question. A friend of yours comes, he's a layman, he comes to you and he says, Father, I have something that has been bothering me and I want to ask your opinion. And you say, would you like to go to confession? And he says, no, I don't need to go to confession. I just want to talk man to man. And he tells you, Father, I cheated on my wife. I cheated on my wife. We've been married 23 years and I cheated on my wife. What should I do, Father? Should I tell my wife or shouldn't I tell my wife? I'm sure all of you right now with moral theology degrees, you will want to take on and open up and talk for minutes about it. But I don't want you to do that. I want you to take this little situation that I'm sure some of you had not in confession, but on a walk, on an hike, on a pub, and think for a moment what your answer would be. Yes, you need to tell your wife. No, don't tell your wife. Whatever intellect answer you'll come up. And take this concept and bring her now into my world of finance and correlate it with transparency. Will you be telling your parishioner everything crystal clear, where the money is, how much money is going, how much money was spent in settlement, paying lawyers' fees, and so on and so forth, conscious that they will throw stone at you? Or you are not going to say anything, conscious that when they're going to find out, they're going to throw stone at you. So my simple presentation, because I told that we have to stop at 2:30 so that you might have some questions, is do not be afraid. Yes, buy the book Accounting for Dummies. I have it. There is nothing wrong about it. Every priest should have Accounting for Dummies so that you can go through every once in a while and understand the difference between accrual numbers and real numbers. Don't just ask your bookkeeper, and especially don't tell yourself, I already know everything, because that's not true. Ask yourself instead, Lord, can you please help me to be a courageous man? And the reason why I'm telling you this is at 4 o'clock today, I'm going to be on EWTN with Doc Neck talking about my book. And I know that he's going to ask me, okay, tell us some of the stories, some of backstage between you and Mother Teresa, between you and St. Pope John Paul II. And I'm going to tell him one that I'm going to tell you right now in conclusion of my monologue. And please, my apologies if I disappointed some of you. One day, I asked St. Pope John Paul II why he was so fixated with do not be afraid, with these 4 words, with this biblical word. I asked him, and he looked at me, and he answered, Mario, reason is we don't need to be afraid because God is always one day ahead of us. This is one of the most simple but profound things that St. Pope John Paul II has ever told me. And this is what I'm going to tell you. Everything that I said, everything that Carlos said, everything that everybody said, I'm sure my dear friend Pat scared the heck out of you. No, I'm joking. Okay? Do not be afraid, because God is always one day ahead of us. Thank you very much. And I'm now going to free the screen, and so that even Carlos, I just have to figure here, stop sharing, so that Carlo, and we can now see Father Peter, and if anybody has any question, I'm here and Carlos is here. And then I'm going to go outside and smoke my cigar, because unfortunately I'm not like Monsignor Joseph that I can smoke it in my room. I have to go outside.
Mario, just to your penultimate point about how much do you reveal to parishioners.
Yes.
My first parish, and I explained to the fathers earlier that I had not been in any parish work until I was 10 years ordained, and this was a small place and probably should have been closed 40 years earlier and so forth. But in very short order, I discovered that my predecessor had mishandled probably something about $250,000 over his 25-year tenure, having him in a New Jersey parish, having relatives living in Massachusetts on the payroll, and this is before Skype and all the rest. So this was, yeah. And I thought about it long and hard, and you know me well enough that I'm straight shooter, and this would be my normal thing would be to say to the people, this is the mess that we're in and why. And I thought long about it, sought a lot of counsel, and I finally decided I would not discuss it for the simple reason that the average parishioner may well come to say, well, if that guy did it, why can't we believe that this guy is going to do the same thing? And so I said, let's let the past be the past and let's move on. And I think that's the advice it's the same thing I say with your case about the guy committing adultery. In the sacrament of penance, I say to him, you are not to tell your wife that. Don't share your guilt with her. So, any other comments or questions for either gentleman? This has been a very quiet group for 3 days, so it has. They may be more the thinking type that need to assimilate, and so we'll have all of these videos online within a day or two. So,
Father, I have a from Mario.
Father Richard, yeah.
Hi, Father. I mean, I ran into a situation where I went into a parish where, Mario, you mentioned about the bookkeeper having been like for 15, 20 years as a bookkeeper. And every time I would go to make a change or the step to make things more accountable, the resistance that I received was just amazing. Even to asking for the passwords and logins for the computers for the QuickBooks and everything took like an act of Congress just to get to be able to see what was happening. And then in the end, it was this bookkeeper that I had approached the diocese because I saw that there was some funny figures going on, and they did nothing about it. But then later on, after I left, they finally recognized the fact, and she's no longer there. But what do you do in a situation where, here you are trying to do the best thing possible, trying to be accountable and responsible in the parish with the finances for the school and the parish, and there's no backing or any support from the diocesan finance office, from the bookkeeper you have is bucking you every day, trying to to undermine everything that you're doing. I mean, any suggestions on what to do?
So I've seen, and then anybody can jump in, but I just can't. Now, may I ask you, which diocese are you in, Father?
Norwich, Connecticut.
Norwich, Connecticut. Oh, I know. I know your bishop very well, and you probably know my dear friend, Father Kevin. He's an amazing golfer that is down in Mystic. He was Bishop Cody, the secretary for many years.
Yes.
So, and anyway, there are many red flags, fathers. Okay, there are many red flags that you learn in the corporate world to detect, especially with assistants or with middle management. I'll give you an example. 98% of the job that you describe in the Catholic Church are fulfilled by ladies. Okay, so first of all, you need to figure out, is the lady's family normal? Okay, so you establish a relationship, and you might learn that her husband lost her job. Red flag. You might learn that she tells you that one of her son is an addiction. Red flag. So you have to start interacting as human person, so that when she starts sharing some of her family situation, you can understand immediately where, those are red flags. Why? Because if she tells you that her husband just got a stroke, for instance, okay, stats say that lady, she has 86% more chances that she might misjudge and misappropriate. All right? Why? Because in that moment, her husband is deficient. Her husband is the income provider. She is the second income provider. Now she sees herself as the first income provider. Therefore, in her brain, I need to provide. Okay? And because I need to provide, she might take up another job, or she might see an abundance here and there and decide to do a temporary appropriation. You know what I mean, right? Yep. So first, you got to know the person. And then you need to be able to communicate with the person what your expectations are. And my experience, dealing with pastors and having done a lot of financial forensic analysis is you don't do it directly, you do it indirectly, so you go through the finance council. You know, so within the finance council, you can start, you are a smart man, you'll understand which one of these, especially if your parish is not a 3,000 family parish, but a 500 families parish, you will understand within the parish council who has a relationship with her. And so you will start externating some of your needs to the parish council, that they will go down to her and she will come to you with the passwords. She will come to you with documents. So she will reverse it. Rather than you asking, she'll be offering them to you. Again, there are always exceptions where you just arrive, you don't know anybody within the parish council, and your guts tell you that there is something that's not going right. You call the chancery and they're all busy because they don't want to help you. And so that's when I say, that's when you call people that you trust. Most of the time I advise outside of the parish. You share some opinions. Today, you don't need a password to access a computer, Father. There are people that they can remotely access a computer without any password. All right. So there are many ways that you can get to establish a relationship. Number one, engaging with the person, trying to understand the backstage so that you can have all of these red flags coming up. Number two, you can communicate. If you see that you cannot do it directly, then you do it indirectly through the finance council or even the parish council, somebody that knows her, okay? Somebody, you know. And then number three, if your smell, if your guts, this is not right, I don't feel comfortable, well, you all have, as they say in Jersey, you all have your friend Guido on your iPhone, okay? So you call your friend Guido, that will definitely help you to access a laptop or your desktop, and will be able to help you to figure out what to do. So this is what I was talking before about the role of the laity versus the role of the clergy. You know, I recently helped a priest in a diocese where he was summoned by the bishop. And when he got summoned by the bishop and him alone, the bishop told him that he had received the night before a phone call by a very angry mother who told the bishop that her 16 years old daughter went to confession to Father, and during confession, Father was inappropriate. So I told the pastor, I said, did you stand up and leave? I hope, right? And I said, no, I actually pooped in my pants. I had absolutely no idea what to do. And I said, well, that's a problem. Because when you are summoned by the bishop, you don't just go up there like a puppy. You ask, may I ask why? That's normal. If in the corporate world, I am summoned by the CEO, I have every right, and I'm not sounding unprofessional or as a bully, and Carlos agrees with me, I know. You ask why. And he has to say something, and if he doesn't, well, you don't show up alone, right? I'm not saying that you have to show up with 6 canon lawyers and 3 civil lawyers, but definitely you will not show up alone. So where am I going with this? You have to always remember that you cannot be afraid because God is one day ahead of us. And so your guts, they tell you that something is wrong. Guess what, Father? Something is wrong because your guts are not wrong, okay? And so you got to figure out how to, with the minimum effort, you can get the maximum return. Now, sorry if I went too long, but I gave you three things. If somebody has something else. You know, one thing that I wanted to say very quickly is there is this misconception that when a new pastor arrives in the parish for 1 year, he shouldn't change anything. In my opinion, that's banana soap or BS, as you will probably call it. Imagine if a CEO is called into a company and they tell him that for 1 year, he doesn't have to do anything. Doesn't work like that. I'm not saying, on the other hand, a priest should not arrive in a parish and the next day fire everybody. Okay? But common sense. We got to use common sense.
All right. Anybody else? Otherwise, we're going to wrap. I think you should have realized from Tuesday night to the present, there was a natural progression of topics. So we started with the church's understanding of what our schools are all about, et cetera. And the finance thing, which most people start to talk about first, is really the last element in the whole project. Because if we're doing all the other stuff correctly, the finance thing very often almost takes care of itself. We talk about having, a mission-driven vision of things. And if people see good things happening, they fork over the bucks. And I've been a firm believer for many years now, our problems in Catholic education are not essentially financial, they're essentially faith-related. And my usual mantra, you explain to me how penniless immigrants built these institutions and the most affluent population in the history of the church cannot support them. So the problem is not ultimately financial. It's a part of the picture, but it's not the real picture. And we make a big mistake when we start to blame COVID for 20 schools closing. That's absurd, all right? And anybody who believes it is stupid. So at any rate, on a more positive note, I want to thank all of you, and we had many others that were with us in various segments during these 3 days. Hopefully next year we'll be back into reality. You saw Dean Gillette sent us a note asking, hoping that we'd be at Seton Hall next year in a more personal environment than this. But I think we did the best we could, and God bless all your efforts. If you need anything from our Catholic Education Foundation, by all means, you have all the contact information. I'm going to be sending you in the next couple of days some request for feedback on what we did, and if any of the presenters have material that they want to make sure that the fathers get, we'll be happy to pass that on. So thanks very much. God bless you, and let's hope that we can negotiate the next year well for the salvation of an awful lot of young souls. Thank you.